Now moving on to the next statement on defence acquisition reform, and I call James Cartlidge.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and with your permission I'd like to make a statement on our plans for reform of the MOD's acquisition system. Nimrod, Snatch Land Rovers, Ajax, Crow's Nest and Morpheus. The narrative of our acquisition system has long been dogged by major programmes that were variously over complex, over budget, over time. Of course, military procurement is inherently complex, and external factors, particularly supply chain disruption, have caused delays across the board which are likely to continue hitting programmes for the time being. It is also true that our system has excelled at procuring vast quantities of ordnance into Ukraine. We've not stood still. We've been identifying and addressing systemic issues that impact on delivery. We've been driving pace and agility through streamlined processes and increasing the capability and capacity of SROs, our senior responsible owners. And over the last 6 years, D&S has come a long way in its internal reform efforts. Nonetheless, the long-standing weaknesses of defence acquisition are well known, including a tendency to exquisite procurement, potentially too bespoke to export, leaving industrial capacity vulnerable. As Sheldon's Ajax report assessed, personnel wary of speaking up as problems emerge, and in particular, and in my view, the most significant, a model of delegated authority implemented after Lord Levine's 2011 report that was supposed to drive financial responsibility, but instead makes prioritisation hard to achieve in practice. With budgets under strain from inflation, the result is inevitable, what we call over-programming. In the absence of effective prioritisation, too many projects chasing a finite amount of funding. Inadvertently, this drives a competition between the three single services, each vying to get their programme on contract, knowing funding is oversubscribed. Such over-programming can only be dealt with in one way: delay, shifting programmes to the right to make the books balance. Mr Deputy Speaker, none of these problems compare to the most compelling reason for reform. In a world where our adversaries are threatening to outcompete us in capability terms, we have no choice but to reform acquisition, or see our military competitiveness diminished. Ukraine has shown that today's battle space is highly contested. Integrated operations are essential. In 2021, we announced the integrated operating concept, recognising the military need for an integrated concept of operations, but maintaining a delegated procurement system. So today, I announce our new integrated procurement model. In a world where multi-domain communications are critical and data integration is paramount, at the same time where our kit must be secure with key elements made in the UK, and we must prioritise procuring enablers alongside the shiny new platform that cannot work without them. What does this mean in practice? There will be 5 key features of our new approach. First, it will be joined up with procurement anchored in pan-defence affordability rather than ad hoc silos vulnerable to over-programming. A key example will be our pending munitions strategy, a top priority given our need to replenish weapon stocks to warfighting levels. Pan-defence prioritisation of munitions procurement will not only be driven by the hard reality of the greatest threats we face, but the scale of demand signal required for always-on production, the optimal outcome for both military and industry. Secondly, we will have new checks and balances to challenge assumptions at the outset of programmes. Specifically, our new Integration Design Authority, based within Strategic Command, will be empowered to ensure our new approach is adopted in practice. If requirements lack a plan for data integration or accompanying enablers, the proposal will be sent back. But they will also be able to monitor programmes for where opportunities may arise, for example, to better harness AI or novel technologies. Meanwhile, in the MOD's largely civilian sphere, a defence-wide portfolio approach will bring together all the expertise at our disposal to enable properly informed choices and decisions on priorities. The aim will be to provide a credible second opinion to ministers to weigh alongside the military's proposed requirements. In particular, this will include a far stronger role for our brilliant scientists at DSTL to focus on technological viability. Experts will be tasked with market analysis and prioritising advice on industrial options, ensuring we make the best informed decision on whether to go off the shelf, sovereign manufacture, or somewhere in between. And to avoid new oversight leading simply to more red tape, this reform takes place hand in hand with defence design aimed at streamlining our internal processes. The third key feature is prioritising exportability, which will now be considered in depth from the very outset of programmes, so that we maximise the potential market for a given capability and therefore drive British industrial resilience. That's why one of the key expert voices will be our export specialists. At the moment, their primary focus is on export campaigns, largely for mature products. But I want that expertise to be embedded within the MOD's acquisition process from the beginning, giving us robust data to quantify the risk that bespoke requirements might create a delta between our needs and international demand. Above all, meaning that our international export campaigns can commence at a far earlier point in the product life cycle. The fourth feature of our new approach is to empower industrial innovation. We have already started our radical new venture of engaging industry at secret to give the strongest possible understanding of our future requirements. My aim is to embed this approach throughout procurement, driving the deepest possible relationship with industry that enables entrepreneurial innovation to flourish and our supply chains to become more resilient. A more holistic supplier management approach will complement this by enabling the department to speak with a clearer voice regarding priorities once on contract. Fifthly and finally, we will pursue spiral development by default, seeking 60 to 80% of the possible rather than striving for perfection. For such spiral programmes, we will abolish initial operating capability and full operating capability. Instead of IOC or FOC, there will be MDC, the minimum deployable capability. And whilst there will have to be exceptions, we have set new default time targets for programmes, 3 years for digital, 5 for platforms, because this is all about pace. But to achieve pace, we need the right people, capable, senior responsible owners operating in an environment of psychological safety. As such, and given its emphasis on our people and psychological safety, I'm pleased to report we believe we have now implemented all 24 recommendations of the Sheldon Review into Ajax. Finally, how will this systematic change be implemented, Mr. Deputy Speaker? I said to the HCDC that our plan was to launch our new model in the next financial year. So from the second week of April, the Integration Design Authority will be formally delivering its new oversight function in support of the integrated procurement model. For major new programmes starting after that date, newly formed expert advice will be made available to ministers, ensuring we thrash out all the hard issues at the beginning of a major procurement, locking down the key policy decisions so that our SROs and commercial functions can deliver at pace from there on in. Although for contractual reasons, existing programmes will continue under their current procurement mode, on the 8th of April, we will publish our new Spiral Development Playbook so that existing programmes which can adopt spiral features will be empowered to do so. On exportability, yesterday I published the next stage of our new medium helicopter competition. This includes a strong weighting for exports to ensure the high-quality rotary work it will support in the UK is sustainable over the long term. Such an approach to weighting exportability, where appropriate, will become the default from April the 8th. From that date, our 3- and 5-year targets will apply to new programmes, including top priority pending procurements such as the Mobile Fires platform. Ukraine has shown how close combat artillery remains critical to warfighting. We will now accelerate that crucial acquisition, exemplifying our new approach whereby we will order critical enablers in parallel to the platform itself, particularly the ammunition. But Ukraine has also shown the importance of drones, and uncrewed systems will form the first overall category of pipe cleaner for the integrated procurement model from end to end. Alongside this statement, I'm today publishing a short guidance note explaining the nuts and bolts of our new acquisition approach, copies of which will be placed in the library of the House and I believe will be available in the vote office after I've sat down, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The current environment in which we find ourselves, war in Europe, has made it impossible to ignore the need for reform. I commend this statement to the House.
Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by thanking the Minister for his statement and for early sight of it? Mr. Deputy Speaker, defence procurement matters. It provides the vital kit that our forces need to fight, as well as supporting hundreds of thousands of UK jobs. We need to get this right as a nation for both our national security and for economic growth. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, defence procurement is a mess. It needs deep and major reform. The Public Accounts Committee describes it as broken and repeatedly wasting taxpayers' money. And it's been a mess for the last 14 years. Since 2010, the Conservatives have wasted £15 billion of taxpayers' money through mismanagement of defence procurement programmes. £5 billion has been wasted in this Parliament alone. And with 46 out of 52 major projects not on time or not on budget, this government are failing British forces and failing British taxpayers. It's as a government that time and again has been criticised for poor performance on defence procurement. There have been 17 National Audit Office reports on procurement in the MOD since 2019, 4 reports by the Defence Select Committee and 8 reports by the Public Accounts Committee, and they've all been critical, some highly critical, of the government. So it's right that the Minister is proposing some changes, and we welcome the fact that he's proposing changes. He mentioned Ajax. Can the Minister explain how his proposals would have stopped the disasters of the Ajax procurement? That was supposed to see vehicles in service in 2017, but they will not now go on operational deployment until 2026, and over £4 billion has been spent and just 44 vehicles delivered to date. That's 70% of the budget spent for 7% of the vehicles ordered. That cannot be described, Mr Deputy Speaker, as good value for money. Now, the MOD's command paper refresh, which sets out his policy for acquisition reform, doesn't even mention tackling waste, and it doesn't mention value for money. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, how would these changes that he's proposed stop what happened to the E7 wedge-tail procurement? This programme, vital to enabling the UK to meet our NATO commitments, was cut from 5 planes to 3 by a ministerial decision to save money. But the changes have meant that the RAF gets only 60% of the capability it wants, whilst paying 90% of the original price. He mentioned Morpheus. How would his proposals stop cost overruns, such as occurred in the Morpheus communications system procurement? This £395 million contract, awarded in 2017, was cancelled just before Christmas, having delivered nothing at a cost of £690 million. It leaves the ageing Bowman having to be used for another decade by our forces in the field. And as he said in his statement, he's just announced the invitation to negotiate on the new medium helicopter. It's taken him since September 2022, when this announcement was first expected, and 3 subsequent delays to get the announcement finally made. So why has it taken so long? And how will his integrated procurement model prevent delay after delay to expected invitations to negotiate happening in future? He expects the contract to be signed in 2025. Does it really take 3 years to invite negotiations and write contract specifications? And will his new integrated procurement model speed this up, or will it slow things down at the front end? How does his announcement today tackle the waste, poor value for money and delays that appear endemic in the current MOD procurement system? He says the new integrated procurement model will be implemented this year in respect of new procurements, but when does he actually expect to see better value, faster, less wasteful procurements actually happening? He talks about procurement being anchored in pan-defence affordability, but his 10-year equipment plan is already £17 billion over budget. So what adjustments are going to be made there? Mr Deputy Speaker, the long-standing failures on procurement in the MOD matter in an increasingly dangerous world. They send a message, just as the signals sent to our adversaries over the last 14 years by the current government hollowing out our armed forces, creating a recruitment crisis and shrinking the army to its smallest size since the Napoleonic era send a message. Labour believes that defence procurement can strengthen UK sovereignty, security and economic growth. Defence procurement reform will be a top priority for a Labour government to ensure that our troops have the kit they need to fight and to fulfil their NATO obligations.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I am grateful to the Honourable Lady for her comments. I would say, first of all, I actually think that there are some issues here that are above party politics and playing politics, if I'm honest, especially when we look at the threat we face and the need for us to have more competitive military procurement. But, I mean, she is aware that for all that she said, we have seen a one-year reduction in procurement time from December 2020 to December 22. Extraordinary efforts in DNS in particular to get equipment into Ukraine, and I think we should never underestimate that. The way we've both gifted our own stocks and scoured the world to find an enormous amount of munitions, not least 300,000 artillery shells. That is very positive procurement and in the hour of need as far as Ukraine is concerned. But she asked a perfectly fair question. Obviously, we cannot say how any of these measures would have worked in the past, but to take some of those hypothetical questions, for example, how would this have helped in respect of Ajax, which I think is the key one given the Sheldon report? And as I say, I can only speculate. But if I take, for example, the emphasis on exportability, this will be robust and from the start of programmes. If you were required to look at that, I do think that puts more pressure where requirements are overly exquisite, because of course that will balance out against the international demand. The reason we want to promote exportability is to ultimately strengthen the resilience of our industrial base. Our market is not big enough. If we have that check in place, I think it will reduce that tendency towards the exquisite. Secondly, we will have this new setup in terms of the advice we receive at the beginning about this expert advice, the second opinion as I call it, particularly scientists at DSTL, export experts at DBT, and our own civil servants on finance and so on. Very clear advice, which again would look at some of the issues, the technical issues around potential platforms. At the moment, to be frank, and I appreciate it's only possible to say from internal knowledge, but you don't get that level of, shall we say, balance against and challenge, frankly, against the primary requirement coming forward from the frontline command. If we take the example, how would it have applied with NMH? Well, the Honourable Lady asked, will this add time at the beginning? And what I would say, I can't comment on the specifics of NMH because it's commercially sensitive, but talking in generality, I would trade more time at the beginning, thrashing out the big issues, working out and locking down the policy on, for example, industrial production, so that these issues don't find themselves being reopened later in time. Of course, I'm talking generically, I'm not on specific programmes. But the issue is, if you don't lock these things down, there is a real habit for them to come back later and to create the biggest delay you could experience when the programme gets put in question. So I do think that's crucial. Finally, she asked about the affordability issue and the equipment plan. I think this is the most important part. I spoke about the munitions plan, the munitions strategy. We could simply say, will the single services come forward with their priorities in terms of new munitions? Whereas I think the best way to do this and how we are doing it is to look robustly at the threat we face. That is the most important issue, to work back from that and then prioritise at a pan-defence level what the most urgent requirements are in terms of new munitions. I think many people would think that's common sense, but that's not necessarily the way that the system has worked. So let me finish by saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in response, perhaps the most positive experience I've had as Defence Procurement Minister was visiting one of our drone SMEs who were bringing forward a drone that we were using in Ukraine. They were receiving data from the front line and spirally developing that platform within days to go back into service so it was competitive against the threat they were facing based on the data. I want to create a constant loop between industry and the MOD, where we're sharing data, where we're sharing frontline knowledge, so that we have a far more rapid period of technological innovation. I think when you look at that, the equipment plan, this very static look over 10 years, will look like an old-fashioned way of looking at things. The priority is to get technology into the hands of the military. That will increasingly be on the software basis, and that is how we strengthen our armed forces overall.
Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Sir Jeremy Quinn.
I congratulate the Minister on the statement. He's looking to the future, and there's a lot to commend in it. In particular, absolutely right to focus on data collection and making certain we are AI ready. I'm delighted about DSTL's enhanced role. That was one of the learnings from Ajax, and I'm pleased that all the recommendations of Sheldon are being taken forward on the closer industrial working at secret and exportability, entirely consistent with the Defence Security Industrial Strategy, absolutely welcome and a very positive sign. Above all, I'm delighted with the emphasis on spiral development and the new concept of the MDC. We all know the benefits of that. Getting something which is right and appropriate onto the front line where it can be spirally developed is good for industry. They see a drumbeat of orders. It's good for the services. They don't need to think they're going to get everything in one bite. So it's all positive. The only thing I'd ask him is not to forget the basics. He referred to it in his speech, but SROs that have got enough bandwidth, enough support and enough time and length on the project are absolutely critical, and a culture in which they can experiment, but if something ain't working, that they pull stumps. That should not be a source of shame. That's the inevitable consequence of being forward-leaning and being modern and being experimental. They should say, this isn't working, reinvest the cash elsewhere. That should be commended when SROs come to you with that kind of circumstance.
Well, I am very, very grateful, Chairman of the Select Committee, and he's absolutely right. To take those 2 points, the importance of SROs, the biggest issue we face in many ways is, ironically, for all the talk about technology, it's people. And this is across the economy in many ways and across the public sector. But in terms of SROs, yes, we want to empower them. There are some brilliant SROs in the department that it's been a pleasure to work with. What I would stress is, I think we're now at the point where 90% of SROs spend at least 50% of their time solely on one project. That's very positive. On his point about cultural change, let me be frank. We can publish all the strategies we want, but if it doesn't get delivered and doesn't happen and change culture, it won't have that effect on output, which we actually want to see. And if I go back to my drone example, he spoke about the need, if you like, to learn from failure, which is how many of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world have succeeded. The case in question, when I visited that SME that was developing a highly effective drone being used on the front line, the day I visited, they'd had bad news. But the crucial thing is, they took that bad news, they spiralled the platform, they learnt from it and made sure that when it went out again, it was competitive. That's the key to the system.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement and for his honesty in detailing the complexity and the difficulties in defence procurement, and I wish him every success with the proposals he's outlined. Back in December, the National Audit Office submitted to the report to the MOD that it faced a £16.9 billion black hole in equipment funding. Now, I didn't see any mention in the statement of how that would be addressed, and I fear that it may not be covered in the budget. So perhaps the Minister could enlighten me. Also, can he guarantee that we will be able to meet essential contributions both to NATO and Ukraine during the time of conflict? Missing from the statement was any detail on the post-Brexit defence sector labour shortages. So I would like to hear how government plans to address these to support the sector. Also missing is parliamentary scrutiny, especially with regards to the nuclear programme. So what assurances can the Minister give that this will be scrutinised by the Defence Committee and Parliament? Given that we are working with allies to support Ukraine, which I welcome, do we not now need a mechanism such as a comprehensive defence security treaty with the EU to further this? And finally, there is considerable emphasis on prioritising exportability. Does the UK Government acknowledge that arms exports and procurement programmes with the State of Israel could make us complicit in war crimes? That is a concern many of the public hold, and I'd be grateful for his comments on that matter.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for the broad thrust of his comments. I mean, going backwards in terms of arms exports, he knows that we have strong and robust rules, and of course we follow those, and we keep all of our existing export rules under review. He mentioned about nuclear parliamentary scrutiny. Well, I answered two successive adjournment debates on nuclear from Scottish colleagues. I was in front of the Defence Select Committee recently where I spoke as openly as I could on the highly sensitive issue of the recent certification of our nuclear submarine HMS Vanguard. As regards two other key points, he mentioned about lack of labour supply from the EU. What I would gently say to the Honourable Gentleman, when I speak to defence companies, what I see is a real willingness to invest in apprenticeships so that we grow our own UK workforce. I think that's what we all want to see. And finally, on the equipment plan, He also made the same point as the Honourable Lady who speaks for the opposition. What I would say is the equipment plan is a moment in time. It is a huge programme over 10 years, and only a minority of it, perhaps 25–30%, is actually on contract. What that is showing is effectively the aspiration of programmes in the future. Now, there will be other programmes not on contract that we're not going to pull out of, that will be expected to be part of that. But there is room to have flexibility, and for me the purpose of this acquisition reform is to inform that process based on what matters most of all: data from the front line, wargaming data from what's happening in Ukraine and from our own wargaming, informing spiral development and technological development. That's the way forward, and I think that will be a far more flexible process than taking these very rigid views.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all just remind the House of my entry in the members' interest in the register? Can I commend my honourable friend for the remarkable pace at which he has got to grips with the challenges of acquisition in defence? He's not been in post very long, and I think he's brought intellectual rigour to this challenge, which some of us have been trying to do for a while. I'd also like to endorse everything that was said by the Chairman of the Select Committee, who is an expert on these issues, and I'm really pleased that he's sought to bring the learning from the current conflict in Ukraine back into our own system here in the UK. Other countries are learning how to adapt their acquisition systems rapidly, and we absolutely need to do the same. So very briefly, I completely endorse the integrated procurement model. We had the precursors for this were in the complex weapons programme, which has been running for over 10 years. I think the fact that he's referred to it in the current contract that he announced yesterday for the next stage of the competition for the medium helicopter lift is a really good example of that. Introducing agility, what he said about exportability, what he said about innovation, are all things that many of us have been pushing the MOD to take forward, and the spiral development, and in particular the move to go from an initial operating capability and final operating capability to a minimum deployable should have a huge impact on accelerating things. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the SRO point, which was referred to earlier, I think if he can look at extending terms, double, triple terms for service personnel and key civil servants in that role, he will assist enormously in retaining knowledge within the system.
To remind the House, please focus on the question that you want the Minister to respond to. Minister.
Well, it's a privilege to have a question like that from a former Minister for Defence Procurement who follows another former Minister for Defence Procurement, the Chairman of the committee. If he doesn't mind me saying what he said to me privately when I got the job, he made this point about the importance then of SROs spending as long as possible in role. That was in the Sheldon report. Obviously, there is an employment law issue in the sense we can't insist on that. But I think I referred to the statistics showing what we're doing on SROs. We're investing more into them, the Army in particular. A couple of other quick points about learning lessons from Ukraine. Absolutely. One lesson that I have been struck by is the importance of electronic warfare and jamming and interference, understanding the way in which the battle space has changed, which is why I keep emphasising the importance in our system of getting data from the front and from wargaming to inform procurement. Finally, he spoke about complex weapons. Incredibly important points. It's about the portfolio approach, which actually should lead to more agile commercial relationships, enabling both a better demand signal to industry, which drives their investment, but also gives us a more nimble approach when dealing with industry.
Lightwood.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Is it right for the Minister to seek to reform a defence procurement system that the Public Accounts Committee describes as broken? The Shadow Secretary of State has just delivered a speech to the Policy Exchange, where he set out that a future Labour government will create a new National Armaments Director to coordinate and oversee a defence procurement. Why hasn't this government done it in the last 14 years?
Well, it's interesting to see what has just been WhatsApped by the Labour Whip's office. But I'm happy to share what's actually happening in the real world if he wants to hear. Andy Start, who runs DNS, is an excellent National Armaments Director. He's been out leading trade fairs in Ukraine. He's led reform in DNS. And above all, at a time of war in Europe, he has overseen DNS, particularly in Abbey Wood, getting equipment out to Ukraine and has helped keep them in the fight.
Francois.
Forgive me, sir. Yes! I've waited years to hear an MOD minister issue this statement, and this very good minister has done just that. It's true, the PAC said the procurement system was broken. The Defence Committee last summer endorsed that in the report. It was a subcommittee I chaired, entitled "It is broke and it's time to fix it." Well, I take this as the fix it, the put right plan. Can I welcome it, and in particular the sense of urgency that goes with it? When the Defence Secretary has told us we now live in a pre-war rather than a post-war world, we must do this quicker and, crucially, faster. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, but could the Minister assure me and the whole House that that point about the sense of urgency will be at the centre of this, and he and Andy Stark will now get on with it?
Mr. Secretary, I'm honoured by my right honourable friend. We enjoy our robust exchanges, but that was one I will particularly remember. What I would say is this phrase, the sense of urgency, is, I think, what the public want to hear, because as important as our exchanges are in here today, this is really serious. This is why I think this is above politics. This is about the fact that our adversaries are ramping up their procurement, their technology, at a frankly frightening pace in some cases. That's why the crucial thing here is this embracing of this deep relationship with industry, this constant feedback loop on data from the front line and from wargaming. And if I say to my honourable friend, I think the committee have an important role here, which is that you're right. What we want to see, I've set out the speech, the intention. For this to be embedded, we will have a key set of milestones which we can work together with to show that it's being implemented. If we do that together, I think we can get the pressure on to ensure that this actually becomes manifest.
Board. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I would like to just pick up on this point about urgency. We've seen what the UK is capable of in defence acquisition, from urgent capability requirements or previously urgent operational requirements. These harness the ingenuity of British industry, and they combine that with the professionalism of the British Armed Forces personnel. So they remove bureaucracy, they focus on the capability rather than detailed specifications, and they deliver amazing equipment in very short timescales. So a great example is the Jackal, the all-terrain mobility platform which was developed at Dunkeswell in my Honiton constituency. I wonder, how much is this new integrated procurement model informed by the UCR process?
Minister. Well, it's always struck me when how many former service personnel, Mr. Deputy Speaker, will raise on matters of defence procurement the issue of urgent operational requirements, or whatever else we call them, and whatever variation on the acronym. He's absolutely right to stress their importance. I would say that they're not something you can use at scale for the whole procurement system, but in specific urgent areas, they are absolutely critical. We will continue to use them. I am considering them in a couple of sensitive areas, which obviously I can't talk about further, but it's an excellent point. And by the way, the Jackal is an excellent platform. My first trade mission was to the Czech Republic on exports, and the Jackal was there, and I was proud to receive glowing reviews from their Defence Select Committee about it.
Sunderland.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I also welcome the statement today and the bold strategy, so thank you to the Minister. We had a conversation yesterday in which I suggested that we needed an arbiter of good taste within Stratcom. I'm delighted to see the IDA being formed now, which should allow for a bit of rigour with tri-service interest. Could I please also make a point about how we can further reform acquisition? To my mind, if we are serious about not writing cheques that we can't cash, about financial rigour, discipline and planning, what we need to be doing is making procurement teams responsible for the entire capability through life. Can I please leave that with him? I'm being mischievous, but it's a seed I want to sow.
Good mischief.
Well, I'm grateful my own friend also served and has great expertise on logistics and these matters. And what I would say to him is actually, in many ways, that is the portfolio approach. Having teams within MOD who are focused on a particular capability, cutting across the frontline commands potentially and across the stovepipe approach. It's been particularly useful for complex weapons. In effect, as I've said, we will be using that with drones and with uncrewed systems, but I'm happy to look into that further. I'm also glad that he stresses the importance of the IDA and Stratcom. Just to be clear, this is about having a way of calling out issues which I suspect, I hope are not commonplace. But having that presence there will hopefully lead to that cultural change, which is the key thing we want to see, so that we get into the habit that when we procure, we are looking at, it's not just the platform, it's got the key enablers as well. If we do that, get the basics right, we will set programmes up for success.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome my honourable friend's statement? He outlined several changes, and within them I'm sure his emphasis upon people is absolutely correct. Procurement is not just a matter of systems, but about how they're implemented and who implements them. And the culture within teams is absolutely important too. Project creep after commencement can be a problem. Specification changes drive complexity, cost and delay. So does my honourable friend agree with me that removing delay from the programmes is critical, because if for no other reason, the international security situation demands that?
Well, my honourable friend, who speaks with great expertise from significant ministerial experience, makes an excellent point. I agree with him wholeheartedly. There's been some debate about the issue of to what extent you can sort of lock requirements so that they don't get changed, because it is a frustration. My sense, and I hope I tried to share this earlier, is that what you really need to lock at the beginning are the top-level political decisions, for example, around the type of manufacture, whether sovereign, off the shelf or some combination thereof, which I think is, you could argue is the case with the new medium helicopter. If you do that, then I think our SROs and our officials and commercial teams will feel empowered so they can get on and rush to the finish line.
Bernard Jenkin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend, while congratulating him on his excellent statement, what is going to be put in place in terms of training and professional development to underpin this new policy? Because what he is describing is a wholesale transformation of culture, attitude and behaviour, which is required in the Ministry of Defence, particularly around the pace and the people and the leadership of teams. This will not be achieved unless there is a concerted effort to change the culture, to implement a change programme in MOD and the Armed Forces that will underpin what he's seeking to achieve. Spot on.
Well, I am very grateful to my constituency neighbour, another Essex MP with a great passion for defence procurement reform. We've discussed it at length. He's absolutely right to emphasise the importance of training. What I would say is a lot of this is already starting to happen and come to fruition. If I give him one example, very recently I referred to a meeting with industry at Secret. I attended one such meeting in main building. We had Milcap, who is in charge of military capability in MOD, and myself sitting with a wide number of defence industries and speaking to them. The thing that enthused them was because we were at Secret, we were able to share as sensitively as possible our future plans. So the point is, a lot of what I'm saying here is building on work that's ongoing, particularly at DNS, for example. But he's right, if we want to get this, to make this work, we have to have the people and they have to have the training.
Sloder.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend will know full well that I am a huge advocate of Leonardo helicopters in neighbouring Yeovil constituency. The home of British helicopters, I should say, is the only helicopter manufacturer, end-to-end supply chain manufacturer in the United Kingdom. Can I welcome today's statement, and can I also very much welcome his statement earlier in the week about the new medium-sized helicopter procurement. But could he just briefly outline to me how might organisations such as Leonardo Helicopters, who employ thousands of people in South Somerset and West Dorset, benefit from his statement today?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. He is a champion for the rotary industry that supports so many jobs in his constituency, and it is thanks to the championing of that interest by him and other colleagues who have constituency interest in that procurement that it's moving forward as it is. What I would stress to him, obviously it's a competition, therefore we have to be even-handed and recognise that all three companies have their strengths. But I would emphasise to him 2 points about that procurement. First of all, there is a strong emphasis on UK industrial contribution, particularly in design work. That is the most important work. That's what we want to see in the UK. The second bit is the huge weighting for exportability. I was surprised to find, as far as I'm aware, Type 31 is the only other such procurement where we've had a weighting for exportability. I want it to be a default going forward, but he can therefore say to his constituents that because of his campaigning, this procurement will give a strong weighting to UK jobs and UK prosperity.
Wild.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Defence procurement has been a work in progress since Samuel Pepys, and I welcome these latest reforms. One of the issues which I saw when I was in the Ministry of Defence and then on the Public Accounts Committee was that SROs are in place for a fraction of the contract life cycle. So will you ensure those longer terms apply across all programmes, not just those in the Army? And how will these much-needed reforms help get better value for money, particularly for contracts that are awarded without competition?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point about Samuel Pepys. I suppose my answer diplomatically would be it's been subject to spiral development perhaps for longer than we think. But he makes an important point about value for money, and particularly in terms of single source. I would stress these changes will come into force at the same time as we are also reforming single source regulations. I will have the great pleasure of bringing forward an SI very soon, which will make a number of changes to single source regulations to ensure that they are optimised. They are a good way of ensuring that the inevitable single source procurement, which we will always have in defence, not least in highly sensitive areas or where there is one specialist supplier, are as effective as possible. It's a very good point.
Mr Pritchard. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the statement and particularly the new thinking around factoring in exports for the future out of defence acquisition and procurement. Can I thank the Minister for his recent visit to Shropshire, and would he like to put on record his thanks for all the fantastic defence engineers, men and women and apprentices that work at RBSL, BAE Land Systems and Defence Support Group Babcock, who are delivering for defence, keeping us safe at home and abroad? And finally, would he like to perhaps hint, hopefully, at new jobs and new contracts going forward up to 2030 for Shropshire defence jobs?
Well, I am very grateful to my right honourable friend. He's an absolute champion of defence jobs in his constituency in Shropshire. I was delighted to visit RBSL in Telford, where, of course, they're making not only Boxer, but Challenger 3, two of the three key components of our future armoured combat battle groups. It was a pleasure to meet the apprentices in particular and some of those workers to see the reality behind those jobs that we talk on often as statistics. Babcock also an important employer in his constituency, but absolutely what I would say to him is the opportunity will be there not only from our own procurement, but by putting exportability at the heart of procurement, ensuring that we sustain our industrial base for as long as possible by giving them the widest possible market.
I'd like to thank the Minister for his